joke, like, then the new Christians are in the mosque and they're praying Salat al-Asr. So in some time, there was one general at that time, and he was known as General Ximenes. And Ximenes was the one who really pushed for the strong part of the Inquisition, where basically, if you were a practicing Muslim, you could be put to the sword. And it got to a point where it was so extreme that if you had anything that showed a resemblance of being Muslim, you'd be put to the sword. For example, if people would be bathing on Thursday night or Friday morning because it's Jumu'ah time, you'd be persecuted for this. And things had become so bad at that time. Again, they consulted their scholars. They said, we can't pray openly. What should we do? So the scholars would advise them, make tayammum, which is dry ablution. And they sometimes, because if you were to do it properly even, they would know that you're a Muslim. So they advise them to brush your hand on the wall, and that will suffice as your wudu. And rather than praying as you usually would, they say, continue walking through the marketplace as you would, but pray and prostrate with your eyes. This is amazing. The limitations that they had.
Even in that situation, Allah gives us a concession.
Of course, we see that still you did have those Muslims who wouldn't give up on their prayer.
Would you?
Of course not. A'udhu billah. Inshallah, we never would. But inshallah, we don't face this fitna either. It would be very understand the severity of being in such a situation, but they still kept steadfast. At that time, when Spain had been lost, in 1492, the fall of Granada and Cordoba, and Andalus was lost. At that same time, it's very interesting that in 1492, as many people know, it's an important date, because this is when Columbus had sailed to the Americas. Now, it's still interesting because even though the Muslim Empire had fallen, you still had these Muslims there. The ones who were forced to convert, but they still kept Islam in their heart. And when Columbus had actually sailed forward to the Americas, most of, if not the majority of his, 99% of his crew were these people who were Muslims who were forced to convert.
Right.
Because you still had many of the artisans, who were Muslims on the inside. And what had happened when Columbus had reached the Americas, his main admiral, his main man on board of the ship, he actually rebelled against Columbus, and he declared a jihad against Columbus. And he said, you're an oppressive ruler of an oppressive nation, and we're Muslims, and you're not going to stop us. So he actually fought against him.
But again, jihad doesn't necessarily mean fighting. It means that struggle. And I guess the people in that oppressive situation, where they were saying they cared to follow their religion, but knew that if they did so, there was harm maybe for them. They sought advice from their learned scholars, alhamdulillah, and they got given the concession under that circumstances.
Of course, because really they faced destruction where if they showed any signs of Islam, they were amazingly discriminated against. They were standing up for their rights.
That was their jihad. That was their striving. That was their struggle.
Indeed. So even until this time, Islam was still having an amazing influence in Spain. Now, after that, basically, we see the end of Andalus. Other areas of Europe at that same time also experienced a history of Islam in their area. And the part of Italy, where my father actually comes from, which is around Sicily and Calabria. And it helps to visualize Italy, they say that Italy is shaped like a boot. So if you go down towards the toe...
It's the island off the end of the toe.
The toe is Calabria, where we're from, and the island just off the toe, it's like the kicking the soccer ball. That soccer ball is Sicily, as they say. Now, what's interesting is Sicily was actually under Muslim control for almost 200 years. And Calabria and much of southern Italy was also under Muslim control for 100 to 150 years. So much of the same time that Andalus was under the rule of Muslims, you also had southern Italy under the control of other Muslims.
So maybe your far ancestors were Muslims.
Yeah, it's always a possibility.
Could be, yeah.
And it's amazing to look because if you do travel through that area, you don't see many visible signs of Islam. It's like it's almost completely disappeared. But yet through that time which the Muslims were in there was two languages spoken in Sicily, which was Arabic and Greek, because you had a Greek minority who continued to use their language there. And you'll find that they were the ones who were most rebellious towards Islam. But the local Italians, many, up to a quarter, if not half of the local Sicilian population had become Muslim, that embraced Islam. And Arabic was their language. And even when the Norman invaders came and actually took Sicily after that 200-year reign, still Arabic was the official language of the island. And it continued to be for quite some time.
So the Muslims, they will never let go of the Arabic?
No, this is something...
When we say Assalamu alaikum, alaikum assalam, we will not give this up. And this is just the basics. I mean, we are the new boys, probably always going to be the new boys for the next 10 years. But this is obviously, it should be every Muslim's intention, is to learn the Arabic, and it's part of this which is going to, inshallah, help to unite us as an ummah.
Indeed, and of course at that time, the main books, the main centres of learning were all in Arabic.
Everything in, yeah, that's right.
So the local population felt an inclination and actually had this love for Arabic so much that they continued to use it after the Muslims
Well, I
had
suppose
left.
if you want to be educated and the books are in that language, you've got to go for it. Like I guess a lot of Europe was doing was heading for Latin.
Indeed, that was
in their books.
Indeed. It's interesting, around this time, this is something which I only actually discovered recently through researching this topic, that while the Muslims remained in southern Italy, they pushed up slowly, and they reached all the way until Rome. Now, as you would know, Rome is the heartland of Christianity and especially Catholicism.
Yeah.
You have St. Peter's Basilica, which is the main church of Christianity and Catholicism. It's basically like the Muslims have Mecca,
Exactly.
they have Rome, they have the Vatican.
Yeah.
Now, it's amazing that the Muslims actually pushed up all the way until Rome, and St. Peter's was actually sacked. The Muslims came in, and they could have taken the city. What happened? They came through, they sacked St. Peter's, they took the place, but then they pushed back down south. Now, this, of course, was an attack on the heart of Christianity. And so the Christians saw this as an amazing thing, and they had to have a big response to it. So when the Normans came through, and the Normans were the French Vikings, if you like.
Yep.
They were the ones who came from Normandy in northern Europe, and they had come down during the Crusades mostly, and they had taken southern Italy from the Muslims. And so at that time, the people who were in Rome, also they sort of pushed down and sandwiched the Muslims almost. And what they did in an act of revenge, they said, before from when you sacked our place, we're going to get you. And they took many of the prisoners and they forced them to build a wall that to this day stands around the Vatican. It's a very big wall and it's there to defend the place. So they said, you got us once and you're not going to get us again. But it's very, very interesting just to see how far Islam pushed into that area. Now at that time, as I mentioned, you had the Normans who were coming through that area, mostly because at that time the Crusades were happening. Now, anyone would have heard of the Crusades and exactly what it was. You had essentially the Holy Land, which was Palestine, which was central to Muslims, to Jews, and to Christians.
We all lived in harmony there.
Indeed, they were living in harmony.
And it makes you wonder what so-called progress we have made.
Indeed, and again, we can learn lessons from this.
Yeah.
What had happened first off, the Muslims were controlling this area, and the Christians, they felt threatened. They felt threatened, and they also saw an opportunity for trade and business there. So on the pretense of saying that what we see as our holy land, we see you might be desecrating it, or you're stopping pilgrims from coming in, which by the most part was not true, because the Seljuk Turks who were there at the time, they allowed many people in. If anything did happen, it might have been a few minor incidents, nothing to start a massive war over. So what had happened is, they said, we want our holy land. The Muslims said, you're not having it. And this war happened, and it culminated into what we know as the Crusades. So the Christians pushed forward, and all of these forces of Europe, you had the Pope rallying behind them. He said, these people, these uncivilized barbarians, they've taken our land, and we've got to come and liberate it. Little did he know, of course, the Muslims were the ones who were the utmost, they were the most educated people. You had all of these lies which really were born throughout the Crusades, because the people of Europe were quite ignorant at that time.
So right back then, you got people saying to the Christians, oh, we know about the Muslims and they're barbarians.
Yeah, and of course.
And we must be scared of them and fight against them. And people would say, of course, we want to defend our land.
And of course,
it seems like not a lot has changed in that
Indeed.
respect, in terms of the lies and the misconceptions.
And indeed, it was far from the truth. The Muslims were nothing like that.
As is now.
Yes, but the Christians were easy to fall for. The Europeans didn't know too much. So once they had actually came there, you would see a lot of them, they said, that we're willing to go on this crusade. And of course, crusade, it comes from the word cross, the Latin word for cross, crux. So they were fighting a war to establish the cross in that land. And they had come with all of and they're willing to leave their families, to leave their homes, to travel all the way to the Holy Land, only to get there and sort of say, hey, this enemy that we're supposed to be fighting, they're actually some quite good guys. And what's amazing, even in the first crusade, many of the people who had actually come to so-called liberate the Holy Land went there and they embraced Islam.
Alhamdulillah.
There are numerous accounts of these Christians coming there, seeing how the Muslims were, and joining them. This is something which is
Who would
truly
blame
amazing.
them? When you have something that you think is the best,
Only to find something better.
and then you find something better, how shocked would you be?
Indeed. Now, at this time, if we look at the Muslim response, another lesson that we can learn, if your land was invaded, these people have come and they've taken it forcefully off you, it's your right, it's your duty to resist that.
Yep.
Because you don't want to be expelled from your homes. You have to fight against that, or justice. Now, what had initially happened is the Muslims at that time, for whatever reason, they didn't see so much of a problem with this. They'd been expelled from their homes, but they also saw it as an opportunity to do some trade with the Christians.